Hello, welcome everybody to another ethics class. And today we are going to talk about something new, something that we didn't discuss before, and something that doesn't resemble the ethical theories that we discussed in the previous classes. Today we're going to talk about ethics of gender. And in general, we're going to talk about feminist criticism of some ethical systems that came before this class, that we talked about before this class, and I'll talk about a couple of ethical approaches to, a couple of feminist approaches to ethical systems or moral theories in general. So when we discussed about cultural relativism, we talked that we just pointed out that there is no basis to say that one norm is superior. That was the distinguishing factor of cultural relativism. And for this reason, cultural relativism makes it difficult to object to sexist practices in another culture, because since one culture is not superior to another culture, according to cultural relativism, there is no theoretical basis. There is no moral basis to criticize another culture, because they're just on a par in terms of moral value. So you cannot criticize one culture using the tools that are generated in another culture. That was the idea. So you cannot criticize the sexist practices in one culture using the philosophical tools that are generated in another culture, according to cultural relativism. And this is one drawback of this approach to ethics, according to feminist criticism. And when we discussed about John Stuart Mill's subjection of women, we saw that he was saying if women have equal rights with men, then all the society will benefit from this. Men will have also particular benefits from this equality. That was the idea of the book Subjection of Women that Mill was writing. But feminist critics say that women have a right to equality, even if it were not the case that all the society would benefit from this. So Mill's idea that all the society would benefit from an equality of women with men was a appealing idea, and he used his theory of utilitarianism to defend this idea. And we talked how he managed to have some effects in the society that he was living at the time. But this idea is somehow not appealing for feminist critics. They say that, okay, it shows that women might have equality with men in a society as long as this new practice that equalizes women with men has benefit for the overall society. But it doesn't show that when this benefit is not there, when overall society doesn't benefit from this equality, women still have the rights. It doesn't show this. The utilitarian approach that Mill advances doesn't show this result. So women, according to these feminist critics, should have a right to equality, even if it were not the case that all the society would benefit from this. So that's why these feminist critics are criticizing Mill's understanding of women's equality with men using his theory of utilitarianism. And when we talked about Kant, we saw that when Kant applies his own moral principles to the society that he lives in, he takes only adult white males as the relevant subjects of his moral calculations. And so Kantian moral philosophy could be used for universal equality, including women, instead of the way Kant uses his moral theory. Actually, this wasn't something that we particularly focused on in our previous classes, but if you were to go and read Kant's anthropology, the way he applies his own theory to the society that he was living, you will see that he takes only adult white males into account as the relevant subjects of his moral calculations. And in fact, Kantian moral philosophy promises more than this. This philosophy could be used to argue for the universal equality of all human beings, including women. So Kant's own application of his moral theory was unsatisfactory for feminist critics who criticize these ethical systems. So general feminist criticism to ethical systems, especially utilitarianism and Kant's moral philosophy, says that these theories exclude women's voices and concerns. And even though these theories, like including utilitarianism and Kant's moral theory, could be used, and actually they are used by later feminists to advocate for women's rights, in much a better way than these authors themselves used these theories, um, the philosophers themselves are excluding women's voices and concerns from the society when they are using their own theories. So these feminist critics say that we need further ethical approaches. We need different moral approaches to these ethical problems. We need approaches that do not neglect women's particular problems or women's concerns that are faced in the society. For this reason, there is a group of feminist writers who developed new approaches to ethical theories. And one of those new theories is called ethics of care. This is only one type of feminist ethics. It's not the only type. It's one type of approach to moral theories, which is called ethics of care. It pays attention to the particular circumstances rather than applying general principles. And I'll explain in the coming slides what I mean by paying attention to particular circumstances rather than applying general principles in those circumstances. Ethics of care argues that emotional engagement and personal relations are essential to moral thinking, and especially the caring relations of love, sympathy, and empathy have particular place in our moral thinking, in our moral calculations. And this approach is not concerned with providing a list of moral instructions. It's blaming utilitarian and Kantian approaches to do what it avoids from doing. It blames Kantian and utilitarian approaches to be providing a list of moral instructions that can be applied in any random situation. This approach, ethics of care, rather aims at helping people develop the sensitivity to approach moral questions for themselves. It's a different approach than Kantian and utilitarian approaches, which were, in a sense, giving moral instructions that could be used in every situation, as if these approaches, as if utilitarian and Kantian approaches were giving instructions, and anybody who doesn't have experience in moral thinking or moral calculations could just take these calculations and apply them into any moral dilemma that they were facing or any situation that they were facing. It was as if these are the tools with which you construct a house. But these critics who develop ethics of care, or who develop other types of feminist critics as well, claim that this is not the case for moral thinking. You have to develop a certain sensitivity to approach moral questions. You cannot use moral instructions and apply them to situations directly. And psychologist Moral Gilligan develops this theory, her theory of ethics of care, using a case called the case of Jake and Amy. She makes an experiment on two 11-year-olds, Jake, a boy, and Amy, a girl. And she writes all about this experiment and her findings, and develops her theory in her book called In a Different Voice. She gives them a thought experiment. Psychologist Carol Gilligan gives these two kids a thought experiment of a guy called Heinz, who considers stealing an expensive drug to save his wife's life. Gilligan asks the kids whether Heinz should steal the drug. And here are the answers that these kids are giving. Jake, the 11-year-old boy, says, Heinz should steal the drug. For one thing, a human life is worth more than money. And if the druggist only makes $1,000, he's still going to live. But if Heinz doesn't steal the drug, his wife is going to die. The druggist can get $1,000 later from rich people with cancer, but Heinz can't get his wife again. If Heinz were caught, the judge would probably think it was the right thing to do. The laws have mistakes, and you can't go writing up a law for everything that you can imagine. So this is the clever answer that the 11-year-old boy was giving. And Gilligan thinks that Jake's judgment that Heinz should steal a drug, like his view of the law as having mistakes, rests on the assumption of agreement, a societal consensus around moral values that allows one to know and expect others to recognize what is the right thing to do. So according to Gilligan, Jake's answer presupposes an assumption. The assumption is that there is a certain consensus in the society, and the society has made this consensus over certain moral principles. Society agrees that there are certain moral principles, and everybody knows about these principles, and there's a certain agreement about these moral principles. And so Jake takes the situation at hand, takes the question of whether Heinz should steal a drug, and thinks of the moral principles that lie behind the foundation of the society. He thinks of the moral principles that the society might have might have come to a consensus on. And one of those principles that Jake assumes is that a human life is worth more than money. So if a human life is worth more than money is one of the principles that the society agrees upon, then he can give the answer that Heinz should steal the drug, because then if he can steal the drug, yes, the druggist, the drug salesperson is going to lose some money, but a person's life would be saved. So losing certain amount of money is nothing compared to a particular human being's life. So that's why Jake thinks this principle should be applied to this situation. So Gilligan finds here an exemplary case in which a boy is applying a certain principle to the case that he faces. And let's see what Amy thinks, the 11-year-old girl. She says, I think Heinz should not steal the drug. I think there might be other ways besides stealing it, like if he could borrow the money or make a loan or something, but he really shouldn't steal the drug. But his wife shouldn't die either. If he stole the drug, he might save his wife then, but if he did, he might have to go to jail. And then his wife might get sicker again, and he couldn't get more of the drug. It might not be good. So they should really just talk it out and find some other way to make the money. So this is Gilligan's analysis of Amy's reply. Amy sees the dilemma not as a math problem with humans, but as a narrative of relationships that extends over time. Amy envisions the wife's continuing need for her husband and the husband's continuing concern for his wife, and seeks to respond to the druggist's need in a way that would sustain rather than sever the connection. So according to Gilligan, Amy just takes the situation of whether Heinz should steal a drug or not in order to save his wife's life, and instead of applying certain principles like a person's life is worth more than money, she just takes into account how would the human relationships will be affected by this action, by the action of stealing the drug. And Amy says if Heinz steals the drug, he might at first sight save his wife's life, but then he might go to jail and he might fall short of helping his wife later on. So in terms of the long-term effect of this act, their relationship would not benefit from Heinz's act of stealing the drug. It would just deteriorate. He would go to jail, and his wife might even get worse. So it's not going to be any better for the wife, nor for Heinz that he steals the drug. And so Amy thinks that they should find a solution by talking about the case and talking it over and finding a solution together. So Amy is like focusing on the relationship between Heinz and his wife, and they should just develop a solution together. It's not like Amy doesn't think like this is a situation in which you can take one principle on which there's a social consensus and you can apply the principle to the case and find the right solution. Amy doesn't offer us a right solution that will solve the case. She thinks the solution lies on considering human relationships of Heinz's relationship with his wife, or their relationship with the druggist, the drug salesperson, and they should just talk the situation over and maybe find a solution together. So Amy is focusing on the human relationships rather than suggesting a solution directly by, as Gilligan says, seeing the problem as if it were a math problem. So let's go on talking about ethics of care and how Gilligan interprets this situation, this thought experiment into a theory. So Gilligan draws a contrast here, a contrast between ethics of principle versus ethics of care. In ethics of care, a person is looking for finding a formula or a principle that we can apply to certain principles and try to find a solution for those situations using the formula. In ethics of care, we try to engage in contextual and sensitive reasoning. So remember Amy's answer to the Heinz's problem. she thinks the solution should be contextual in a sense. They should just sit down with his wife and try to find another way of stealing the money, because, and this is a sensitive situation, and if Heinz steals the drug, it's not going to be good for their relationship in the long term. It's not going to be good for anybody. So in a sense, ethics of care, a person who engages in ethics of care thinks about the contextual relationships, how the relationships would be affected by the particular act in this particular context, and tries to make a sensitive reasoning. And Gilligan apparently thinks that finding a formula or applying ethics of principle does not engage in this contextual and sensitive reasoning. Ethics of care perspective looks into the long-term effects of actions on human relations. Here, the focus is on human relations rather than following certain principles. An ethics of principle usually takes emotions to be a barrier to strong ethical thinking. So for this claim, remember Bentham's and Kant's clear attitudes against emotions and inclinations that we have talked in our previous classes as well. On the other hand, ethics of care takes emotions to be the key elements in moral thinking. So Heinz might have strong emotions for stealing the drug, but on the other hand, he also has emotions for caring about his wife. So he should think about how the relationship would be affected by his strong emotions about stealing the drug versus his emotions of paying attention or paying concern for his wife's ailments. So of course, Gilligan, when he draws her conclusions from this thought experiment, does not just look at this thought experiment and draw these conclusions. This was just one thought experiment taken out from the book and given as an example to show, to be an exemplary of Gilligan's way of thinking. It's not like Gilligan just draws this conclusion just looking at the thought experiment or the interview she's doing with the two kids. That interview for Gilligan is an exemplary case that's reflecting a wider situation in the society. In the society, usually men have a tendency of using ethics of principle when they are faced with moral cases, and women usually engage in ethics of care. The way of thinking that women engage in falls under the title ethics of care, according to Gilligan. But this brings another question that's really important. If men is engaging in certain type of thinking in the society, which is ethics of principle, and women are engaging in another type of thinking, which is ethics of care, this brings the question, is ethics of care essentialist? Let me explain what I mean by this. A theory is essentialist if it assigns certain unchanging roles, permanent roles, to certain sexes, races, individuals, species, etc. And in general, essentialism is taken to be a prejudice in our thinking. So unless an essentialist theory is backed by further arguments to explain why essentialism is not necessarily bad in this particular situation, it must be avoided. So in this example that we are talking about, Gilligan takes ethics of principle to be a way of thinking that usually men are engaging in. Men in the society take moral cases to be cases that we can apply certain principles upon and reach certain solutions which reflect the right way of doing ethical calculations as if they were mathematical calculations. That's what Gilligan thinks. And women approach ethical problems, moral problems, in a more sensitive way. They engage in more sensitive reasoning, and they focus on human relationships and try to find out how human relations would be affected by the solution of these moral problems. But if you pose the problem this way, it seems like men are essentially engaging in moral thinking that requires principles, and women are essentially or necessarily engaging in moral problems using ethics of care. And this is something, as I've just been saying on this slide, this is an essentialist thinking that should be avoided unless we have a very good reason to engage in essentialist thinking. But Gilligan would be horrified by these conclusions that we are reaching. She wouldn't agree with it. So ethics of care benefits from difference in thinking between men and women, but it doesn't argue that the difference in their thinking stems from their biological sexes. This difference is the result of gender roles, rather. So I just put here Simone de Beauvoir's quote, very famous quote from her book, The Second Sex. Beauvoir famously says, Simone de Beauvoir is a French feminist, very famous 20th century feminist. And she says one is not born, but rather becomes a woman. And here is what she means in a nutshell. Girls go through an extensive social training to accept the roles that society deems suitable for women. They are turned into women. They are not. So this quote is usually one used against the essentialist understanding of what a woman is supposed to look like, or what a woman is supposed to do, or what kind of jobs are suitable for a woman. Simone de Beauvoir, this French feminist, is arguing against those claims by saying that it's not true that a woman is born all these attributes that the society assigns to a woman. Rather, the society makes a child turns a child into a woman in time by social training and making the person accept certain roles that the society deems suitable for a woman. So when a person is acting in a certain way as a woman, that's the way that society thinks that a woman should be acting. So that's what we take to be a gender role. It's not the essential biological sex that requires a person to be acting in a certain way, but it's the gender role that the society imposes upon the person. So in that sense, ethics of care is not essentialist. Ethics of care, according to this understanding of gender role versus sex, gender role versus biological sex, ethics of care, it claims that men, as their gender role requires, engages in ethics of principle, and women, as their gender role requires or assigns them, engage in ethics of care. That's what ethics of care is claiming here. So Gilligan says both men and women have the capacity to apply either ethics of principle or ethics of care. The distinction is not about their capacities. So that's why her theory is not essentialist, according to this explanation. It is how gender roles shape their thinking and making men more inclined to ethics of principle, while making women more inclined to ethics of care. In most cultures, a mother and not a father is the primary caregiver for children and elderly parents. Women are more likely to enter the caring professions, such as nursing and elementary school teaching. And women may well be more likely to approach moral questions in the detailed contextual way exemplified by Amy in the thought experiment, in which problems are solved by talking them out rather than applying a formula. So here Gilligan gives an explanation of why it might be the case that women are engaging, even due to their gender roles, engaging in ethics of care rather than the other type of ethics in the society. And according to Gilligan, the reason is this: women are engaging in caring professions much more than men are engaging in those professions. And it's not about only professions, it's the mother who takes care of children and elderly in a family almost all the time, or most of the time at least. So when women are engaging in these type of professions or these type of practices in the family, they become they have more tendency to engage in this type of thinking. They are used to care about human relations because they are the ones who are growing the children. They are the ones who are taking care of the elderly, or in their professions of caring, they are the ones who have to pay particular specific attention, special attention to how human relationships are affected as the result of certain actions. So they refrain from applying certain principles to cases, but they think more about the relationships, and they engage in the contextual way of thinking that the situations require. And that's why Gilligan thinks women develop their capacity of engaging in ethics of care, although both men and women have this capacity. So women are improving their capacities more than men, although both genders have the capacity to develop their abilities to use both type of ethics. And traditionally, men have been much more likely to take on managerial positions that involve directing large numbers of people or making decisions at a distance. In such cases, the only practical approach may be to use abstract principles. In such positions in which men have to take certain decisions without engaging in close relations, like women are engaging in families and in their caring professions, in such relations, in such managerial positions, men do not have to engage in such caring relationships with human beings. So they usually, according to this theory, do not develop their talents about how to improve their human relations. As a result, they have to use principled thinking or principled way of reasoning to take certain decisions. And that's how they develop their talents for ethics of principle, according to Gilligan. So it's the roles that men and women take in society that make them develop or improve their certain talents, their certain capacities. And it's not their essential capacities or abilities that direct them to these ways of reasoning. Gilligan says moral thinking, both for men and women, should include both ethics of principle and ethics of care. So Gilligan doesn't say that ethics of care is the right way of approaching moral problems. For certain moral problems, like the ones that require policymaking, for instance, for municipalities or for governments, you might need abstract principles to apply to people at distance or to apply to a large number of people, right? In those cases, you might need principled decisions. But in other cases, where people might have to make decisions regarding more close relationships, like in the example of Heinz, whether when he's deciding whether he should steal a drug or not, the principle saying that a human being's life is worth more than money might not really give the best results, or might not be the best way of reasoning to find a solution for the case. So according to Gilligan, both women and men need both ways of reasoning, and they are two distinct ways of reasoning about moral problems. So this was one way of understanding how feminist principles or feminist approach could be applied in moral thinking. There are other feminist approaches, and I'll talk about one more approach, another feminist approach to morality. And this approach uses the birdcage metaphor. The reason why a bird cannot leave the birdcage cannot be explained with reference to existence of any of the single wires that make up the cage. The wires together hold the bird in the cage. So it's not only one wire that holds the bird inside, it's all the wires together that prevent the bird from escaping from the cage. And this metaphor is used to understand women's situation in the society. Likewise, certain social systems together oppress women and prevent them from exercising full autonomy. And it's not just one system that prevents women from attaining full autonomy in the society. Analyzing and pointing at only one of these social systems is not sufficient to explain operation of women in societies. For instance, take family. When you say traditional family prevents women from attaining full autonomy and oppresses women, and let's change the family, this might not solve the problem that women are facing in a society. You might have taken one step towards solving some of the problems, but this is not going to give full autonomy to women. It's not going to provide autonomy to women at the same level as men are enjoying autonomy in the society. Just by changing family, you cannot attain the goal of bringing women on a similar standing, on an equal standing with men in the society. So you need to change multiple social systems according to this theory, this approach to moral thinking. And I'll talk about a couple of these ways of oppression. First one is oppression of women through pornography, and philosophers Catherine McKinnon and Andrea Dworkin write about this issue, and McKinnon in particular gives a couple of reasons how or why pornography might be oppressing women in the society. She says, Catherine McKinnon says, many women take part in pornography out of coercion. Some are addicted to the drugs that are provided to them by the owners of porn businesses, and they are coerced into making those movies, because at the end of the day, they are provided these drugs by the people who are making money out of this business. And other women are bullied, threatened, or manipulated into the porn sector, and especially undocumented immigrants are the victims of this pornography sector, according to her analysis. So it's not like women are like choosing porn, or many women, or especially the women that she's talking about, are choosing this engagement as a profession. It's not a voluntary choice for them. They're coerced into this profession. This is what the first reason McKenna thinks pornography oppresses women. And here is the second reason. She says pornography helps reproduce a social environment in which women are expected to serve men's purposes while their own life experiences and prospects are neglected. She thinks because of the roles women are taking in these movies, or in these clips, in these pornography clips, because of these submissive roles that they are taking in these movies, it's reflecting a certain vision in the society, certain idea in the society that improves, fosters the idea that women are supposed to be submissive to men, and they are supposed to serve their needs. Women are supposed to serve men's needs. That's what this pornography sector is reproducing as an idea in the society. And these are the reasons McKinnon thinks oppression of women is increased through pornography. It's one more wire. It's one among other wires of the cage that hold women back from attaining full autonomy in the society. A second wire is oppression of women through science. So science is usually supposed to be objective, but McKenna thinks science is not as objective as we think it is. In modern cultures, science has the credibility that no other realm of knowledge can enjoy. And it has always been male-dominated. Since 1901, for instance, 97% of Nobel Prize winners are men. Women do not seem to be encouraged to engage in science. And McKenna thinks this creates certain disadvantages for women that wouldn't be created otherwise. The way science pictures women is not always fair, according to her. And she gives us the example of hysteria, for instance. For a long time, it was thought to be a medical condition seen only in women, and later even it wasn't seen it wasn't seen even as a disease. It lost any medical attention. So this picture shows that science, which is supposed to be an objective endeavor, being dominated by male members, might work in the disadvantage of women. So might just show women in a weaker situation and might assign them certain sicknesses that doesn't really have scientific objective backing. Science is not, like, in this sense, exempt from social prejudices and norms. It's a different type of social practice. It's still credible. I mean, it's saying that science is a social practice does not put it on an equal standing with other social practices, right? Science still has its own high credible standards, but we shouldn't forget that it's not like as objective as we think it to be. It's still a social practice, albeit a more credible social practice, and it has worked against women's attaining full autonomy historically, and this has to be taken into account according to these feminist orders. The third type of oppression that women suffer is through morality. Like science, moral evaluation has not always been fair to women. For instance, Mary Wollstonecraft in 1792 says she objected to the idea of feminine virtue. Women were taught to be soft, pleasing, alluring, and acquiring gentleness of manners, forbearance, and long-suffering, while men were brought up to be tough, knowledgeable, and independent. And such virtues serve to place women in a subservient place to men, according to this order. So Mary Wollstonecraft just pointed at this idea that in the moral philosophy, certain virtues were assigned to men and certain other virtues were assigned to women. And these virtues that were assigned to women were placing women in a subservient place to men, were placing women in a secondary place to men in the society. And there's nothing essentially true about women that they have to carry these virtues, like virtues of being soft, pleasing, alluring, and acquiring gentleness of manners, or forbearance and long suffering. And while men were brought up to be tough, knowledgeable, and independent. There is nothing essentially true about women that they should have these virtues. So moral thinking historically have worked against women to put them in a secondary position in the society compared to men. Throughout history, also, religious leaders were considered to be moral experts, and they were almost exclusively men. As a result, women were unjustifiably taught that their moral duty was to obey their husbands and fathers, while men were taught that their duty was to be head of the household and command other family members. So according to this third aspect of oppression of women, women were also historically oppressed through morality. So let me go back a couple of slides to show you, to remind you the other types of oppression. So apart from morality, we talked about oppression of women through science and oppression of women through pornography. These were just some examples. It's not like, this is not a comprehensive list of ways that women are, according to these authors, oppressed in the society. This was, these metaphors, sorry, these aspects of oppression of women in society were given by these authors to empower, to strengthen the metaphor of birdcage. So as the birdcage holds the bird inside the cage by means of multiple wires, these ways of oppression hold women back from attaining full autonomy when they work together. So, and it's not the case that these ways of oppression just by themselves hold women back from attaining full autonomy. Okay, let me go forward. So this was another way of approaching female oppression in the society, or approaching moral thinking through feminist lenses. Another idea, another feminist idea to approach morality is intersectionality. So this approach says the division between male and female has been saved from the biological distinctions and made cognizable through social practices. According to this approach, so the understanding of the roles that are assigned to men and women have been made apparent, that, and they are saved from essentialist arguments. According to the distinction between biological sex and social gender, we can now understand that men and women are not born with these certain attributes, or they are not supposed to attain certain virtues just by reference to their biological sexes, but society assigns them certain roles, and we just talked that this is called gender roles. Individuals have gender roles that are assigned to them by the society. And this approach, the approach of intersectionality, says this distinction, the distinction between biological sex and gender, still makes a binary division between two genders. You might think, what's the problem with this? And in the idea of intersectionality says, in actuality, many people do not fall under either male or female category. And these individuals carrying queer identity might have the particular ways of oppression specific to them. So people who are carrying queer identity, queer individuals, do not identify as either male or female. And there are particular ways of oppression that these people are facing in the society. It's not like they're facing the oppressions that male and female gender roles, people who are identifying with male and female gender roles are facing. Their oppression is specific to them. So intersectionality says we need further detailed categories to understand the oppression of individuals in the society. So they suggest that there can be multiple categories through which an individual, or multiple people for that matter, are disadvantaged in a society. Sexual preference, age, social class, disability are some prominent categories. So it's not true that people are oppressed in society just due to their gender roles. It's true that women have a particular way of being oppressed or disadvantaged in a society. But it's also true that a woman being disadvantaged due to the woman gender role that they're carrying can also be disadvantaged due to their disability, or due to their race, or due to their age or social class. And these disadvantages should be approached from different angles. They should be given separate care and concern, and they should be solved on their own standings, according to their own problems, according to problems that they create on their own accounts. And the author Kimberly Crenshaw is the person who has conjoined this term of intersectionality. And according to her, a single moral approach, whether the ethics of care or the ethics of justice, cannot address the situation of all women. The complex ways in which disadvantage interacts needs special attention. Okay, let me go over very shortly what we have talked about today. So we started by thinking about how feminist approach might criticize the moral thinking, the moral reasoning that we discussed in our previous classes. We discussed in our previous classes about utilitarianism and Kantian moral thinking in detail. And feminist approach says there was something missing in those approaches, especially the way those approaches were developed historically favors men above women and puts women in a certain disadvantaged position. And in order to point a particular problem that women are facing in the society, we need new understanding, new ways of reasoning regarding moral problems. And we talked about how Carol Gilligan, a moral psychologist, developed her view of ethics of care, according to which men and women in society engage in different ways of thinking about moral problems. They have different ways of reasoning due to the social roles that they are assigned in the society. And she thinks both men and women should use these two different approaches to morality that she named ethics of principle and ethics of care. That was one approach to that was one feminist approach to morality. Another feminist approach to morality used the idea of the metaphor of birdcage and pointed at different ways women were oppressed in the society, and claimed that in order that women should attain full autonomy, or should attain autonomy as much as men in general are attaining in the society, all of these oppressions should be lifted. It's not sufficient to address one type of oppression only. And I just used 3 types of oppression as examples. They were oppression of women in society through pornography, through science, and through moral theories. And those types of oppressions were brought forward as the ones that should be addressed directly. And the third type of feminist approach, and I don't know if I should call this feminist, but we can, I think, call this feminist as well, to morality, was intersectionality. Kimberly Crenshaw was pointing at different types of disadvantages individuals are facing in the society, and due to the differences in these types of disadvantages, these types of problems, or these types of problems that are created by these advantages, should be paid particular attention, but they should be paid different types of attention as well. Okay, so I think this ends today's class, and thank you for your attention. And this is the end of this class. Thank you.